The only thing on our agenda today is a hearing on House Bill number 2119. And I must say that there are 39 opponents, and I'm the only proponent, evidently. So these odds are not, this is not fair. You guys are going to need more people. All right, let's start with a brief description on what the bill does.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee, and it will be brief because there are many people who wish to testify. I'm just going to direct my comments. I think the committee is very familiar with the whole issue, and so I'm just going to direct my comments to the new language in the bill. As you know, this bill attempts to do one thing, and that is terminate this credit in a manner that does not abrogate existing agreements. And there are just two places in the statute here that the bill attempts to do that. The first is a reference on page 1 that's really just it doesn't really it isn't really the meat of what we're of the language. The real language you'll find on page 3 in subsection I. So as the committee is probably aware, this is a fairly complex credit, and there's an initial award, and then the owner, the developer of the housing project gets a credit every year for 10 years. And then for each of those credits, there's also a carry forward period. So if you look at the language on page 3, you'll see that there's an attempt there to terminate the credit, on July 1st, 2025, except that such provisions shall continue to apply through the credit period and any applicable carry forward period of an affordable housing tax credit allocation awarded to the owner of a qualified development by the KHRC as provided in subsection B before July 1st, 2025. So the intent of the language there is to terminate things on July 1st, 2025 with respect to initial allocations of the credit. And then, there is that 10-year period, which is, the provisions of the statute would continue to apply to. And then there's a carry forward years, which the provisions of the statute would continue to apply to, and that's the intent of that language. The reference to subsection B, if you look at the first page of the bill, subsection B pertains to the issuance of an allocation certificate to the owner of a qualified development. And the KHRC is to issue that simultaneously with issuance of Federal Form 8609. So the intent, one of the issues with the way that this statute is written is that allocation, you could argue, is perhaps used in two different ways. So the intent with the amendment here was to reference allocation as the initial allocation before each year there's an additional credit for 10 years. And it's my understanding that Federal Form 8609 is issued right at the beginning. But if subsection B in fact does not apply to the initial issuance of a certificate that gets the whole ball rolling, then then the language that at subsection I would need to be changed. So that's the intent of the amendment, and I'll just stand for questions on that.
Okay, Charles, thank you very much for that. Committee, are there any questions for the reviser? I'm not seeing any, Charles, but I just want to make it clear that this bill, if enacted, will not delete any of the current tax credits. They'll still carry forward. The $500 million of state tax credits will still be there.
That is the intent of the language, and it was developed, with working with one of our tax advisors. Now, if there are comments that it doesn't accomplish that, but that's the intent of this language.
Okay, and then the process for 2025 has already begun, and there's been investments made, and those are, do you know if they have been allocated or not allocated? Because the intent was not to delete anything that was already in the works.
Correct. The intent is to cut off that initial allocation July 1st, 2025. So there isn't any abrogation of, reliance on these credits.
Okay. All right. So for those of you that are concerned about the current round of tax credits, the intent is not to interfere with those on this bill, whether we need to make a change to the language or not, but as long as those tax credits are consumed or issued or awarded by July 1st, 2025, we're all good. Is that right?
That's the intent of the language.
Okay. Well, we'll get a little more information on that committee before we work this bill to make sure that we don't make that mistake. Seeing no further questions, thank you. All right, so of the 39 opponents, I'm showing that there are 5 of you that are oral. Can everyone that's going to present today raise your hand so I make sure that, okay, so we've got, would somebody count that for me? No, there's a lot more than that.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
How many?
8.
So it looks like we have 8, 11. 11? Okay, there are 11 opponents that are oral and 2 neutrals that are oral. There's no proponents. So we will start by allowing 5 minutes of presentation, and my vice chair will keep track of time, and when his time goes off, we'll cut you off and then ask questions. First up, I have Kansas Housing Association. Tony, welcome back to committee. You'll remember Tony from Monday's testimony on the informational hearing.
Thank you, Chair, Committee. My name is Tony Kresnick from Wichita, Kansas, 2004 graduate of the University of Kansas, 2024 Leadership Kansas graduate, Chamber of Commerce, State of Kansas Manufacturing Board. I'm the owner of Kennedy Glass, CEO of Flint Hills Development Group, and I'm on the executive board of the Kansas Housing Association. Very quickly, I wanted to go over some of the questions that arose last week. One, the 8609 is issued at the end of the development process, not the beginning. If people make too much money, are they kicked out of the program? Absolutely not. However, I would say that when Ronald Reagan passed this bill and Tax Reform Act in 1986, I do not believe it was intended to be a permanent housing solution for families. It was intended to be a stepping stone to that end. Oftentimes when we see families make more money, they do move on to market rate development, oftentimes seeking their own home ownership. Came up on Tuesday that the developers take and make all of the money. Wanted to put a little clarification behind this. Unfortunately, that's not the case for myself. But no, that is absolutely not the case. Every state issues what's called a qualified allocation plan, which essentially serves as the RFP the state provides for affordable housing. These developer fees are capped at each state. On average, the profit percentage compared to the total project costs from these developer fees is in the 7 to 9% range. And over the next week, I'm happy to show the math here if that would help. However, the tax credit equity is used as gap financing. Without this tax credit equity, these projects would not occur. What is the cost or return on investment to the taxpayers of the state of Kansas? I apologize, I did not have this information readily available. Tommy is going to speak about that after me. Most states calculate that it's somewhere between for every dollar allocated, $5 to $6 come back, roughly 500% to 600% return on the investment. Are these developments automatically tax exempt? The vast majority of these developments pay property taxes. Some developments need property tax relief in high counties and usually go through the neighborhood revitalization plan. However, this is not commonplace. However, do keep in mind that all residential developments in the state of Kansas are exempt from sales tax on labor. Representative Williams asked how many unique developments are involved in this program. We had an opportunity to speak this morning. A single developer cannot have 5 development deals going at any given time that are not completed where 8609s are issued. So it would be almost impossible over a 3-year span to have 5 developments ongoing. Specifically, as stated in the qualified allocation plan, a developer may not be part of more than 3 awards in any given year. As an example, last year there was 28 awards. Further, the award of these credits is based upon an objective point criteria as listed in the qualified allocation plan. And lastly, there are urban, rural, and preservation set-asides ensuring all areas of the state are benefited by this program. In short, how did we get here? In 2022, we had a bipartisan party come together and decide that we were falling way short on affordable housing compared to our neighboring states and the rest of the nation. To give you an idea, we were only developing 462 units in 2022. In 2023, a few quick stats. With the state LIHTC, we estimate that we will build a total of 2,138 units and $540 million in development revenue. Without that state credit in 2023, we would only build 280 units or an 87% reduction, and we would only generate $76 million in revenue or an 86% reduction. 2024, very similar with the state LIHTC credit. We will build approximately 2,600 units and generate $557 million in development revenue. Without that, we would receive an 87.5% reduction to the unit count and an 82.2% reduction in terms of total revenue. 2025 estimates are directly in line. As I stated before, our first priority here, and Chairman Tarwater, I appreciate your comments earlier, we must preserve the 2023, 2024, and 2025 qualified allocation plans as signed by this governor, just as every Republican or Democrat governor has signed the qualified allocation plan since the inception of our program. We greatly appreciate the invitation to speak with you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, sir. Committee, any questions for Tony? All right, seeing none, appreciate your time again today.
Thank you.
You must have done a really good job last time to get everybody to this moment. Next up, we have Sugar Creek Capital. Tommy Lohman. Welcome to committee.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm Tommy Lohman. I'm the Director of Housing Policy at Sugar Creek Capital. I'm here in opposition of House Bill 2119. I do agree, however, with the committee that the program needs to be resized to fit Kansas, and I think there's multiple ways to do that without killing the whole program. In 2023, there was an increase of about 14,000 population in Kansas, 2024 about 19,000. So Kansas is growing, but if Kansas didn't grow, the population remained flat, you're still losing housing through attrition, natural disasters, fires, and all the other sorts of things. So if you eliminated a program and you just, like Tony just mentioned, and you just started back with what you had before, you're going to produce way less housing. In the latest data from the Kansas Department of Administration, they're just showing construction costs are continuing to rise and will rise over the next 5 years. So you're just going to build less with the same amount of money. We all know inflation's high, and so the cost to borrow money is high. It's just hard to build. Before I came to Sugar Creek Capital, I worked at the Georgia Department of Community Affairs, and I ran their housing program. Probably the past 20 years, I've been in community and economic development. But when we were running their program, when I was running their program, we did a study with several different universities, but it was for every dollar that the state invests in the state LIHTC program, there's a return of investment of $5.79. So you're getting money back in. That's largely attributed to the development of these affordable housing properties. These properties, when you start developing affordable housing and multifamily scale, these properties produce jobs for about 41 different industry sectors. Asphalt folks, concrete workers, carpenters, plumbers, you name it. Those folks live here in Kansas. Now, they need an affordable place to live, but they also need jobs. This does both of those things. And I think if you were to look at cutting some of that back, the loss of the affordable housing credit would slow housing development and reduce a lot of those jobs. So if you went from the numbers that Tony said, I think 2,600 units down to about 200 units or 400 units, you're going to lose a ton of jobs. There's going to be a lot of people not working because of that. I do understand where you're sitting. You got to make sure that the budget doesn't go out of whack. And I think there are some options to do that where you can build this program that will better serve Kansans and fit the Kansas state as a whole. To ensure stability of the program, just existing, everything existing, I think any changes that are going to be made would need to be made in accordance with the 2026 allocation plan going forward, because these developers do put outlay out for these. They're working with local governments. They're going through planning and zoning. They're acquiring property in anticipation of application. And then after application, it may be a while before they get an award. And then after that, they build. So they've spent a lot of money before they get there to the 8609 process. I'll be happy to entertain any questions, but because we have so many speakers, I'm not going to hold you all too long.
All right, thank you. And I might have a question or two, but I'll open it up for questions. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll take questions at this time. I appreciate it. Thank you for your testimony today. Mr. Chairman, I think this might be a question for either Tony or Tommy. I hear what you're saying, and I thank you guys for coming back with some of these numbers that we didn't have the other day. So that does help us color the conversation a little bit more somewhat. When you talk about not deleting the program altogether, can you refresh me on the 9%, 4% piece right there? What does that look like?
Yeah, so the 9% tax credit is set. It's a per capita amount that's set by the federal government. If you're matching a state with the federal program on the nines, and the 9% developments, so if your population increased, it would go up. If your population decreased, it would go down. And it's adjusted for inflation, so it's a good model. Additionally, the 9% developments are more versatile. They're smaller developments. They can go across Kansas, hit a lot of rural areas. You can also build them in metro areas. But that's the nines. I think where the program got out of scope is with the 4% developments. The credit there is generated on the private activity bond that's used, the amount of private activity of the bond that's used. And they're larger developments because those are the developments that can support the debt of those private activity bonds. So if there was a way to work through that, I think you'd be able to build a program that you would know what the outlay was, and it wouldn't just continue to increase.
Thank you for that. Is there, and maybe you or your counterpart, Mr. Tony, is there a number or a cap that would be comfortable?
So there's a lot more work to be done to discuss it. I think it would be good to probably look at what Kansas needs and what the committee thinks would be a good number of housing to build and back into what the number would be to get there. So do you have a goal number of housing units that you want to produce just to keep up with, the needs of the Kansans?
All right, I got to move on. Tony, go ahead.
Rep, I'm speaking just for myself, not on behalf of any of the organizations I listed. The first thing I want to do, and I would want to do if I was y'all, is this 5.79% return. $1 goes out, $5 or $6 comes back. Is that real? If it is, why are we wanting to reduce this program at all? If we do have to reduce this program, because I don't understand budget neutrality, I don't understand politics, I'll tell you, speaking on behalf of myself, if we had less than 1,000 units being developed, it'd be a disaster, right? We were at 500 or 600 in 2022 when we, from a bipartisan standpoint, all agreed that we were coming up short and well short. We're at 2,600 units a year now with the program. So to answer your question, I don't know the exact cap, but I think it'd be pretty easy for us to co-author what that looks like and back into that number, starting with 1,000 units a year. Thank you.
All right, so on the,
Can I clarify one thing? The $5.79 is for Georgia, and all that is going to be based on your tax rate and like a bunch of other factors. I think Kansas Housing Corp may be working with the university to get it, what the economic impact is here. Sorry.
I mean, if that was true, it would be a great thing because we've spent $1.5 billion so far in 3 years, including federal dollars, and that would be a tremendous return. And I can't swallow that number right now. There's just no way we're going to get that kind of money back.
Yeah.
But Christy Williams, or Representative Williams.
Yeah, thank you. So I keep hearing this return on investment of $5.79 for every dollar we spend. Can you tell me what would the return on the investment be for that same amount of money that stays in the pockets of every one of our constituents and they go out and spend it, they go out and invest it? Would that number be higher or lower?
So that's a good question. I can't answer that, but what I can say is if they are living in a place they can't afford, then they're not going to have that money in their pocket either. These units are providing affordable housing for them to put that money back in the economy.
And thank you, sir. How do we know that, of course, that qualified individuals that are at the poverty line or below the poverty line are actually getting a reduced rent when they stay in your apartment complexes? Do you do the checks on that? Do you have a certain percentage that have to be below the federal poverty line? What are the criteria? Do you have to keep the rent? I believe the chairman asked this question previously. Do you have to keep the rent at below market values? What are those safeguards?
So those are great questions, and that is something that every state in the nation that participates in a program has to provide compliance and monitoring for all these properties. In Georgia, we received rent rolls. It might be a better question for Kansas Housing Corp on how they do it here, but we receive rent rolls every month on the rents they're charging. We check those rent rolls to make sure that they meet the area median income limits that are set by that property and that they are in compliance. Additionally, they go out and inspect the units to make sure they are in standard with the code.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may have one more question. All right, thank you. So at least of the documents that I'm looking at, what was provided on the transparency database for 23, it showed 24 recipients, and then I received, thank you very much for those that provided me the LIHTC awards. There were 15 and 13, so that means we have just under 50 recipients. I think Troy, someone just gave us, Tony, sorry, gave us a number of 86. I don't know where that it came from. But I guess my question is, we've got that, let's just say it's 50 recipients, and many of them are repeat recipients because they can do up to 4 at any given time. So that amounts to, in 10 years, a $250 million potentially investment every single year that comes out of our constituents' pockets for, in this case, less than 50 recipients, probably 20 recipients, unique recipients. Do you think that that would be something good for us to go back to our taxpayers? 20 to 30 unique individuals are going to get a break, and our constituents, that fiscal impact is significant. And the number one thing that we hear when we go door to door is we want property tax relief. I'll guarantee you, if this program stays in place, they're not going to see it.
Representative, when you say recipient, you're talking about the developer, right? Not the end user that rents the units. Right. Right. Okay.
So if we're talking about the developer as being the recipient of the award, I would have to put that with Kansas Housing Corp too, who monitors all that. So I don't know who the recipients are. What I would say though, for sure, is I myself would not want to be a LIHTC developer because of the amount of investment you have to put in up front and the risk that's involved. There's so many strings attached to these federal programs. it's not many people want to get into that arena. So I don't know how many of them there are here in Kansas, but that could be limiting the pool of who's getting the award.
All right, further questions? Representative Williams for another one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just for the last comment, it really wouldn't probably be as relevant to us if the developers made 6% or 5% or 9%. Really, it's what's that total fiscal impact for us? And could those dollars, that $250 million annually that will compound, could that better be used by our own taxpayers, putting those dollars back into the economy, getting it to work, investing it for themselves, including those that are living in the apartment complexes that are being built. So that's just a note.
All right, sir, no question there. We're going to have to move on.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Advanced Capital, Colin Nichols.
Chairman and members, thank you for your time today and the opportunity to testify on House Bill 2119. I'm here with Advantage Capital and respectfully in opposition to House Bill 2119. Since 2022, the Kansas Affordable Housing Tax Credit Program has served as a powerful tool to attract private capital for the development and preservation of affordable housing for Kansas's workers, seniors, and families across the state in conjunction with the federal low-income housing tax credit program. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition estimates that Kansas has a deficit of more than 52,000 units across the state. Meanwhile, the program is working to help address the severe supply and demand imbalance in Kansas by providing the Kansas Housing Resource Corporation with sufficient resources to carry out their mission. We also recognize the interconnectedness of housing, economic development, and community prosperity, and do not believe that House Bill 2119, as currently proposed, aligns with the state's goals in those areas. The significant investment in multifamily housing driven by this program will ultimately help Kansas remain an attractive place to live, work, and retire as awarded projects eventually come to fruition. While affordable housing developments often use a variety of funding sources, federal and state tax credits are the driving force that make these projects financially viable. We understand there are legitimate concerns with the long-term fiscal impact of the program, and we are more than happy to meet with the committee and work with the committee on finding a solution and hopefully improving the program going forward. I'm happy to answer any questions.
What would that solution look like in your opinion?
You know, I think going back to my colleague Tommy's suggestion of maybe some guardrails being put in place specifically on the 4% bond side of the equation. Like Tommy mentioned, the 4% federal tax credit and private activity bonds are ultimately what drives that side of the program. The federal 4% tax credit is not capped under federal law. So often what happens is with these 4% projects, which are bigger to support that are needed to be bigger to support the debt on those projects, the state credit that's paired with it on a match program, you know, that's uncapped as well. The 9% projects, on the other hand, because there's a federal cap in place, there's a natural guardrail for the state credit as well. So if you put a limitation on the 4% and bond side of the equation, that could dramatically reduce the fiscal impact, especially with those larger projects.
Okay, so how many, I'm sure research could tell us this, but how many of these deals are the 9% versus the 4%?
I'd have to defer to the Kansas Housing Corporation on the specific numbers, but I would say the 9% probably has more overall, mainly because the 4% are just larger projects, and they consume more credits.
Vice Chair Turk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious I know I missed the first conferees, but moving forward, I would love to know if any of the developers or representatives of the developers coming up to talk today are building anything other than apartment units. If somebody is here building duplexes, single-family homes, anything of that nature, I would love to hear that are utilizing this tax credit. Thanks.
Representative King.
Chairman, you mentioned that a housing shortage of 52,000 approximately. What would a mix of those units look like?
What would a mix of those units look like in terms of a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom?
Sure. Apartments, duplexes, single family.
I would imagine it varies depending on the specific type of developments. I would imagine the larger developments near suburban and urban areas would have, you know, a good, well, for one, more units, and then also a mix depending on, you know, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms to serve families, individual workers. Smaller projects, you might see a little bit less variety, but every development's different, so I couldn't really tell you.
And then, second question. So, ask one more.
Go ahead, sir.
So to Representative Turk's point, are you developing any duplexes or single families, or are these all apartment complexes?
So Advantage Capital is not developing. We're investors in the program, so we don't actually develop the projects ourselves. That said, the program, which is tied to the federal low-income housing tax credit program, it is specific to apartment buildings.
Specific to what?
To apartment buildings.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, seeing no further questions for you, sir, we'll move on.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have the infamous Alex Oral here. And I believe he brought his fan club with him today. So,
Mr. Chairman, I am a strong Catholic family. I do have lots of cousins. So you did stay at the beginning of the hearing to bring more people. So no, good afternoon, committee. For the record, Alex Oral, Senior Vice President, Government Relations for the Kansas Bankers Association. Proud to represent the industry that employs 21,000 Kansans across the state that provide financial services in every single county. I do have some guests with me today, and it is the 2025 Bank Leaders of Kansas class. If you can raise your hand in the back, there's 25 of them that are all working in rural and urban. And besides my government relations job, I do have the distinct honor of running in that leadership program, and being around some of these the last 2 days, I feel significantly underqualified to lead that program. And I know you're laughing about that too, sir. But in terms of brevity, the previous conferees have done a fantastic job. They're the experts on the tax credit side. Mr. Chairman, I do want to just state to you, I really appreciated your opening comments regarding 2023, 2024, 2025. That is our primary major concern of this, is pulling the rug out on the financing side of things, where those tax credits have been assumed and awarded or in the process of awarding. Pulling that out would cause huge issues. And so I do appreciate your recognition of that, because that is our big concern. We understand the fiscal impact too. We're bankers. We understand numbers. We're looking at the state. We want economic activity, and I know you guys have a tough job up here to pick between those certain programs, and I wish you the best of luck on that. But the continuation of this program is really a very different conversation than the primary concern we had here today. You know, I will also state, the state of Kansas for many, many years did not do a very good job at investing in housing. We lost many of our developers to outside states that, whether you like it or not, I would consider it an arms race on tax credits and other type of benefits to move people there. When we're looking at types of policies like this, I think we just make sure to be cognizant of that lack of investment for many years that put us behind the ball. But also, while we're rebuilding that, there's been a lot of programs, and those relationships with some of the developers have gotten better in the previous couple of years. I think we just need to be cognizant of that and those business partners, because we need those partnerships and we need people to want to come to Kansas to build. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for willing to work with us on this bill.
Committee, any questions for Mr. Oral? All right, seeing none. Thanks for coming in today, and congratulations on your leadership class.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
Okay, next up, Deborah Tufel. We won.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee. Thank you for allowing me to stand before you to testify on House Bill 2119. My name is Deborah Tufel, and I'm the president and CEO of the Hutchinson-Reno County Chamber of Commerce. But I stand before you today as the second vice president of the Kansas Economic Development Alliance, who has been in the Capitol today. And I believe we all gave you some M&Ms, so you should be in a really good mood when you hear this testimony. Housing is an important issue for Kansas communities, and I'm standing before you to express concern and opposition to House Bill 2019 for several reasons. Kansas Economic Development Alliance and all of my peers that work in economic development support programs that enable communities to grow by attracting investors who will develop housing that allow people of moderate and low income to afford to live and work in Kansas. Elimination of this tax credit could mean that projects that are in the planning stage could grind to a halt, taking us backwards to a time before we had this program. This is an economic development issue for Kansas companies that have cited affordable housing as a workforce issue. So this is not just a living issue, this is a workforce and business issue. I have examples of that from my own Reno County community, where annually we conduct a business conditions survey, and housing and affordable housing is cited as one of the top issues in order to attract a workforce for the future. There's also examples of states that have had these tax credits and then have eliminated them, and the evidence shows that eliminating the tax credits brings the housing development to a grinding halt. There are examples of states that have brought it back at a lower level, and so we would definitely want your creativity in considering, rather than killing the program altogether, allowing some guardrails and perhaps a reduced percentage. Housing is a big issue for my community in particular. We recently conducted a Reno County Housing Needs Assessment by RDG, and it was cited that housing is one of the top needs. We are just one of those Kansas communities, but I'll give you some numbers. In Reno County, there is a need for over 1,000 new housing units to support residents by 2035 at all income levels. So this is a factor for all income levels. In 2024, in that business conditions survey I mentioned, attracting workforce is an issue. We actually have been able to successfully attract a developer to our community that has a pre-application pending, not just in Hutchinson, but in 2 other Kansas communities. They just submitted that application in January in good faith that this program was going to be alive and well in Kansas. They've invested already in that pre-development. That development could bring 46 units to our community and somewhere over $12 million of new investment. I've talked to that developer. He's actually here today. He came from Springfield, Missouri, very concerned about what this program and killing it might do for his project while it's in the pre-application stage. And so I would just encourage you to think about those developers that have been in good faith submitting applications to our state, hopeful to bring housing for affordable living for our residents and for our future workforce, and now that is in jeopardy. I also talked to him about the property tax and sales tax implications, because in visiting with some of you, there was a concern that these units don't actually go on the property tax rolls and they receive exemptions, and maybe that's true in some instances, but in the case of the developer we are working with, they are not asking for a property tax exemption nor a sales tax exemption, so there are economic benefits that I think you have to consider. The fiscal note is not just in the cost of the tax credits, but there is a positive from all of those taxes that are generated. Those are just a few examples. I won't belabor the point anymore, but I do want to correct one thing for the record, that this program does develop single family and duplex living with this program, not just multifamily housing, and so I just wanted to state that for the record, and I would respectfully stand for questions if you have any.
Vice Chair Turk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you provide me numbers on those houses? You have 46 units. How many of those are anything other than an apartment complex?
I'm sorry, can you restate the question?
You said you had 46 units, correct, in your
Yes, the pre-application that's gone in for the project in Hutchinson would bring 46 units, correct.
And is that an apartment building complex, or are those individual dwellings?
That particular project is an apartment complex, yes.
Thank you.
Would you happen to know how many of these developers you said this gentleman was from Springfield, Missouri, and I believe we had somebody else from St. Louis, Missouri. Is there anyone in Kansas that does this program?
Currently, I'm only working with the one developer. I'm not aware of any other developers, but the fact that they're willing to invest in Kansas, I think, is a testament to there is definitely a need for housing here. We're one of the, we're surrounded by states that offer this particular tax credit. So if this were to go away, I would propose that developers, whether they're from Missouri or any other state, are just going to look at those other states that have a tax credit in place and invest there rather than bringing their dollars to Kansas.
Representative Clayton. I'm sorry, Ranking Member Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. And thank you for being here today. This is more a question for you in your capacity as Kansas Economic Development Alliance. Can you explain to me where the sentiment would come from that seems to indicate that a duplex or a single family dwelling would somehow be superior to an apartment complex? Because I'm not experienced in housing and I don't understand. So maybe you could help me.
Sure. I think the fact is we need housing across the spectrum. There are people across the income spectrums that need apartment dwellings, that need duplex living, and obviously that also want single-family dwelling. I don't think we discriminate across any of that. We need housing units at all levels of the income spectrum from what people can afford. But there's evidence to support from the housing needs assessment that many people simply cannot afford the rents. If you were to build these at commercial construction cost without some sort of tax credit subsidy and without being able to control the rents, you simply could not build affordable housing that people in the lower income spectrums could afford today.
All right, seeing no further questions.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mm-hmm. That's all I'm aware of that were oral proponents, but I know that there were several more of you, so who's up next? Okay, just introduce yourself and tell us who you are. I'm sure we have your testimony. We just weren't sure that it was oral.
No problem. My name is Christina Ashley-Guidry. I am with United Community Services and the Kansas Housing Advocacy Network. So we're in a stage of economic growth, which is great. Our employers need employees who need housing. Kansas has a housing shortage not of 52,000 units, but of 100,000. We need 52,000 units for folks who are at extremely low income, which is 30% of area median income, and we need an extra 44,000 for folks who are at about 50% of median income. So that's households altogether who are making less than $50,000 a year. That lack of housing creates housing instability. And in fact, we've seen a rent spike between 2018 and 2023 of 31% on average. That's an unsustainable amount. So who are these households earning less than $50,000 a year? The Kansas Wage Survey, and I have copies of this for the committee, actually shows us that in our top 5 occupations, every single one, the median wage is below $50,000. So that is 660,000 jobs, our top 5 categories, median wage below $50,000. So what can these core workers afford? They can afford less than $700 to $1,100 a month, including utilities. That price point, we know, you've heard, requires public-private partnership. 32 states use a tax credit to get to that partnership. So why do they do that, including our neighbors? It's not just building crucial housing, it is a good investment, and we can see that in other states. KHRC is working on an analysis for our state. Today, we have 30 cities that are benefiting from this program, where residents and employees are seeing housing for the first time, in some cases, in many years. So we would urge you to retain the affordable housing tax credit as an investment in our economic growth and our household health. If cost savings are needed, KHRC has indicated that you could have a 30 to 40% cost savings by reducing the tax credit from a 10-year period to a 6 or 7-year period. I am happy to stand for any questions. And I do have this handout if you guys want it.
You can email that to us and we'll make sure it gets in the S drive and then into the minutes. Any questions? All right, seeing none, thank you. Okay, sir, just introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. I'm Josh Adrian, and I am from Manhattan, Kansas. I represent the Prime Company here, which would maybe assuage some of your questions that there are developers from Kansas that are here for this meeting. And we are based in Kansas. We haven't built apartment complexes in Kansas in over 14 years because the financials just don't line up and work here. Bringing the LIHTC program, bringing this funding to the state has brought us back into the state, and we are very excited to be able to be here and be building again. We are based in Kansas. If you take the time to go look at the awards list for this last year, you will see that most of the developers that received awards are from Kansas. This is money Kansas is investing in Kansas, and it's returning to Kansas. I'm a little surprised to sit here today in front of the Economic Development Council and hear this desire to shrink something which is the engine for economic development in our communities, which is people. People are the engine that moves economic development forward. And if you can't house them, you don't have the power for economic development to move forward. I think Garden City is a great example of this, a community that we've been talking to a lot over this last year. Garden City has the need for 4,000 housing units. They've been recruiting multiple large businesses in. 4,000 units they need. I looked up, CoStar is a company, a national-wide company that keeps track of housing and different things across the country. 4,000 units is, Kansas has averaged the construction of only 2,700 apartments a year for the past 5 years total in the state, total. And they need 4,000 in Garden City. And you know what? 90% of those units, those 2,700 units, are being built in Johnson, Sedgwick, and Wyandotte counties. So why is it that places like Garden City, Hutch, Hayes, Dodge City, Leavenworth, Salina, Emporia, Junction City, Pittsburgh, Liberal, Great Bend, McPherson, El Dorado, and Ottawa are all communities that have expressed that they have a housing shortage, that they have a housing crisis? If they have these housing crises, how come no one's going there and building there? Well, as a developer from the state of Kansas, I can tell you it's because the math doesn't work. As a developer, we have to know that the investment we're making and the payoff, the economic payoff for us, has to work. And we can only look at that building. But as the state, you get to look at what that building does to the entire economy of that region. And you guys have the opportunity to say, we're going to make it so that that developer is incentivized to be able to make enough money to build something there, knowing that that is going to jumpstart the economy of that community. It gives the youth of those communities a reason and a place to stay, which is one of the biggest problems I see across our state, especially in the rural areas where I grew up, is the youth just heading off to Kansas City, heading off to Dallas, moving away because they don't have good jobs, good places to stay, and nice apartments to live in. This year, our company was selected for an award for a 250-unit apartment complex in Lawrence, Kansas. This is a high-quality apartment complex. It's a 4-story interior hallways. It has elevators. It has a swimming pool. It is a nice, good home for people to live in. And according to the research conducted by the Hoyt Advisory Services for the National Multifamily Housing Council, the estimated economic impact of our one project is $83,553,370, supporting 438 jobs in the community. That's substantial. But if you look at all of the 4% projects that were awarded in the state of Kansas just this year, that number comes out at $538,474,747, supporting 2,833 jobs. The investment that this is into our communities does really pay off. And I think, Representative Tarwater, when you said that, you just don't see that that can work in your mind. And I get that. It's hard to understand. When you see an apartment complex, it's hard to see all of the individuals in there who are working and making a living and paying their taxes. And I know what it's like because after the Great Recession in 2008, my wife and I both lost our jobs. And we were living with our parents and friends and bouncing around, and that was awful. And my wife managed to land a job as a receptionist at a doctor's office. And I got a job working in his apartment complex mowing grass. And we got into an affordable housing project. And we would not have made it without that. And after a few years of living there and working hard and moving up in our jobs, we'd saved up enough money, we bought a house. And guess what? We are productive members, really helping the economy grow around here. And that is the story for most of the people that move into these places. It is a step up into being, having the funds to be able to be an economic driver. One other thing I do want to just address, that this question's come up a few times, and I'm confused by it, a little bit like Representative Clayton. Turk, you've asked about duplexes and single-family homes, and it's an interesting question to me as we're talking about the cost and expense of a program. We're trying to provide the most efficient housing that we can, and that's apartments. The more land you need, the more siding you need for all of these things, it just doesn't pencil out. So sure, people could go and try to make that work under this program, but it's not going to work nearly as well as apartments do. I would love to answer any questions.
Okay, I'm going to open it for questions, but I want to ask first, on your awards that you've gotten, what other incentives have you gotten on the same projects?
We've received one award in the state of Kansas, and that is there in Lawrence. We have a sales tax exemption.
Okay, any property tax abatement? Or
No property tax abatement. I will say that there are communities that are doing that, and to me, I think that is a big sign to see that those communities really need the housing. When they're willing to forfeit their property taxes to get this in their community, that tells me they're serious.
All right, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so a couple of questions for you. So I've heard over and over that you have to adhere to rigorous standards and regulations in order to build these projects, and so it's an additional cost for your group, correct?
That's not really the additional cost. No, I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of extra reporting to make sure once it's operational that, hey, we're following all the rules and everything. There's not really additional cost to building anything that's affordable versus market rate. Our company's been in the market rate development world. That's where we started back in 2005. What we build market rate and what we build affordable, very similar.
Okay, so I could maybe put it this way. Most things that I'm reading, whenever you have additional federal regulations, it will drive the cost up per square foot, maybe 20% or more.
Oh, yeah, in California, that's definitely the case. But here in Kansas, we don't encounter that. We don't have any, we're not having to deal with any sort of Davis-Bacon wages or anything on our projects here. So we're using local subcontractors that are working on other projects. They're getting paid the same as whether it was whether it was straight market or affordable.
Okay, interesting comment. I would be quite surprised if going through all these regulatory hoops didn't cause some increase in cost for you to construct. But second of all, my question is whether you're doing a 4% for the project or a 9% for the project. It depends on what kind of subsidy you're getting back. Let's say you get 70% back in a subsidy. What percentage of that is going to benefit the individual that's actually living in the apartment compared to the investor and other parties that are taking advantage of these 4 and 9%?
Taking advantage of is a strong word. I can't give you the. I mean, that's not my area of expertise on that question there. I can tell you. It's very easy to go through the state's QAP and see the regulations that they have on the income restrictions that we have to stick to. And so the residents that are there, they are getting a significant discount in their rent for living there. And that is able to be funded by the state putting that credit in.
Okay, well, I definitely see that there are some that are going to benefit greatly from this and others that are maybe marginally benefit. And then the taxpayer of Kansas, they get to pay for all the rest. Thank you.
All right, seeing no further questions, thank you. Who's up next? Go ahead and introduce yourself, sir.
Thank you, Chair Tarwater and committee members. Braxton Copley, I'm the Assistant City Manager for Topeka, Kansas. I have submitted my written testimony. In the sake of time, I will just hit a couple of highlights from my written testimony. In 2021, the City of Topeka commissioned a study, a housing study, and we had them look at where we had a shortfall. And they specifically identified we were woefully inadequate in terms of our affordable housing, and that's defined as 80% of AMI, area median income, as well as workforce housing, which is at 80 to 120% of AMI. To the tune of, we need to, between now and 20 years from now, construct 128 affordable housing units per year, as well as 80 workforce housing units per year. In the last few years, we've been way short of those goals. And in fact, by the end of 2025, we had constructed 113, 87 of which were LIHTC. The bottom line is that developers can't construct LIHTC housing without financial incentive. It just doesn't pencil out. And we think that this is a tremendous tool. We would like you to keep this tool to help us address the needs that we have in the city of Topeka for both workforce and affordable housing. Happy to stand for any questions, sir.
Representative Shu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. This might be an appropriate question for you that I've been holding on to since you're on the city side of things. But a couple of the other conferees that have touched on this, I think, but I kind of want to ask it with a little bit of a finer point is, I think the ultimate point of the underlying incentive and this bill is, like, what's the cost if we get rid of the program? So for you, what will we see in Topeka if we don't build enough housing units?
An increase in homelessness.
Do you think it's accurate to say property taxes will increase at a higher rate as well, supply and demand?
Can you repeat the question, sir?
Do you think that it would be accurate to say if we don't have enough housing units, that fewer supply versus continuous high demand, that will lead to higher property taxes going forward as well, versus if we build much more housing?
Certainly one of the things that the city council grapples with on a weekly basis is how do we grow our community? How do we grow that tax base? And to do that, we need to add more housing units, and we also need to add more commercial development as well.
Sir, how many of these of you have been approved in the city of Topeka?
I'm sorry?
How many of these have been approved in the city of Topeka?
You have to defer that to KHRC, sir.
You don't have any yet?
Sir, that would be KHRC could tell you how many 4% or 9%.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were with the city of Topeka. Are you not?
Yes, I am, sir.
How many of these projects have been approved in the city of Topeka?
KHRC is the one that approves the projects.
Are you aware of any?
Sorry, I'll defer to KHRC. They're the ones that would do the approval of the tax credits, not the city of Topeka.
Okay, how many have they approved in the city of Topeka that you're aware of? You work for Topeka. Have you built any? Have there been any built here? If you don't want to answer, don't answer. It wasn't a trick question. I was just wondering how it's working, but have there been any?
I don't have an answer for you, Chair.
Okay. No further questions, sir. All right, who's next?
Hello, good afternoon, Chair Tarwater, members of the committee. My name is Dustin Hare. I'm the Economic Security Policy Analyst for Kansas Action for Children. The point of my testimony today is not to explain how the tax credits work, which you've heard a lot about today, but rather why they're needed. I'm going to touch on some main points from my written testimony, which you should have in that stack of opposition there. Rents have gone up 20% around the state since 2019. 43% of Kansas renters are now considered cost burden. When we look at our Extremely low-income renters, that's people who are making 30% or less of the area median income. 73% of those renters are considered extremely cost-burdened, spending more than 50% of their income on rent. Property taxes have skyrocketed. I think everybody's well aware of that. I used a property search tool to kind of look around my neighborhood, and all of my neighbors' property taxes have gone up anywhere between $1,000 and $2,000 per year since 2019. Perhaps the most alarming statistic I have is that the number of Kansans experiencing unsheltered homelessness has increased 395% since 2019. We are in the middle of a housing affordability crisis. Kansas is feeling the effects of this problem every day, and there's no clear path out of it right now. I know this problem intimately. I used to work directly with unhoused people in my previous role. People would reach out to me because they couldn't find a place to live. They were trying to better their situation, but the service providers also couldn't find places for them to live. There just weren't any. Today, I still hear from renters nearly every week. I got an email yesterday from somebody saying that they had it's always some sort of crisis will come up in their life. They fall a month or two behind on rent. They're desperately looking for some assistance so that they don't fall into homelessness. I give them 2 or 3 numbers for service providers who maybe have rental assistance, and time and again, there's no assistance available. I've also been working with homeowners, usually almost explicitly elderly or disabled, people on Social Security income, fixed income, who have fallen behind on their property taxes, an issue that, again, we're all well aware of. They have a fixed income, but their taxes rise and rise. They become tax sale eligible. This has happened to dozens of families in Wyandotte County, where I live. In 2 months, they are going to have their homes auctioned off. There's no assistance available for those folks either. When I look at the price tag of the affordable housing tax credit, $25 million for year 1, $50 million for year 2, and so on to $250 million per year, I don't share the belief that we can't afford this. I think we can't afford not to do this. When the rate of homelessness quadruples over 5 years, that's not a bunch of Kansans who are, suddenly having a moral failing or something like that. It's a systemic issue. It's not a coincidence that homelessness skyrocketed at the exact same time that housing prices shot up. We have to figure out a way to keep housing in the budget. If there are ways that we can get more homes built for cheaper, any way that we can amend this program, I'm all for it. But we can't kick this can down the road. The market hasn't figured out the answer to this crisis, so we need to step in and do something to help Kansas families. And I'll stand for any questions.
Representative King.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Is this a homeless issue then, or a work economic development issue on this housing program? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think homelessness is a part of it. I think the lack of affordable housing, there's some other folks have pointed to the lack of housing stock, 52,000, 100,000, 43,000, whatever the number is. That lack of housing stock means that, of course, prices go up. And as I said, when we've tried to get people experiencing homelessness housed, we cannot find the units for them. So I think it is a homelessness issue. And I believe that that number quadrupling over 5 years has something to do with the housing stock problem.
All right, seeing no further questions. Thanks for coming in. Is there anyone else? Ryan, are you neutral or are you opponent?
I'm neutral, is this the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman? Or
That's fine. That's fine. Just wanted to.
I just wanted to, I guess, circle the conversation back because you all have asked some wonderful questions. And just a reminder, I'm Ryan Vincent, Executive Director at Kansas Housing Resources Corporation, or KHRC, which administers the credit. We spent a lot of time together on Tuesday, and you've spent a lot of time and thoughtfulness thinking through this issue, so I'm going to be cognizant of your time. I want to highlight a couple of things. One is that we did prepare a written testimony, which you all have. It was responsive to some of the questions that came up in committee on Tuesday, so as you have time, which I know is limited, I'd encourage you to check some of those out. I do want to highlight just a couple of things, as well as address a couple of the questions that came up in this conversation. One is that on Tuesday, there were some questions just about kind of the geographic distribution of these credits and where we could find a list. We now have a list prepared for you on the very last page of our testimony, which is kind of our master document showing all of the awards by housing type, by community, by owner, And specific to the question that came up earlier, we did have awarded one development recently to the city of Topeka, the Water Tower District. It's a 4% new construction deal. There's also Cornerstone right down the street, which is a tax credit property as well. Both very successful projects, and we look forward to getting those to fruition. But circling back on, I guess, kind of a couple other items I did want to make sure that you were all aware of. There is a map in my testimony that gives the geographic distribution of those credits. I want to make sure that we're highlighting that these are rural communities like Colby, 18 units of duplexes, so not just multifamily, but we do single family and duplexes. Russell, 24 homes. Hillsborough, 24 homes. Larger communities like Manhattan, 110 homes. Lenexa, 224 homes. These are urban, these are rural, these are senior, these are family, these are Kansans that all need homes. And part of our mission is to ensure that we are providing access through the resources that you charge us to administer. We're leveraging private activity bonds, $250 million, which is a federal resource that would otherwise be returned to the federal government. I do want to talk about guardrails because you all keep talking about guardrails and we respect that. But I want to point out that the guardrails are really just about fiscal cost for this program. This is an existing program that has been around for 40 years since President Reagan and Congress passed it. The state credit has been around several years, and in the 2 years since we've administered it, it's been audited twice. It has had no findings. There are no allegations that the program isn't efficient or effective. It's simply based on the fiscal costs. So that's important for you to hear. If you charge us to run a different program, we're happy to do it because that's our role as your state's housing finance agency. But you may be reinventing the wheel. This was a program that was in existence. It had staff, it had partners. Because it was in existence, we were able to hit the ground running, and within a couple of years, we were able to finance 4,600 new homes for Kansans. Finally, I want to make sure that you all hear that the way that this bill is currently written, even though the intent is not to take back credits, because of the timing issue brought up, it is currently written where it isn't grandfathering in some projects that were already awarded. The reason for that is a timing thing, that these developments take several years, and KHRC, by federal statute, isn't able to issue the federal cost certification, the federal Form 8609, until the project is complete, until it's been cost certified, until it's been leased up. So I would just be happy to talk, our staff can talk to the revisor's office to make sure that we work with you on that language to make sure that the committee's intent is honored, because as currently written, very few projects would actually receive the credits that they've been awarded if it were to pass as written. Last couple points, just circling back again on your conversation today. So about half of our projects that we've awarded are 9%, about half are 4%. Now the 9% are about a third of the cost, and that's partially because of the way that the scale, the number of units that the 4% deals have. So again, half the projects are 9%, half are 4%, a third of the cost are the 9%, 2/3 of the cost are the 4%. Each one comes with its benefits. So if you were to restrict our ability to finance a lot of those 4% private activity bonds, we're not leveraging the federal resource anymore. We may not be able to get the economies of scale that we're able to get in urban areas like Wichita, like Kansas City, Kansas, like Johnson County. That's the beauty of having a state housing finance agency and partners that have different pots of resources that we're able to identify different projects and be able to get the right resource to the right partners for the right projects so that we're using our state tax money well. Last point is that we have financed single-family housing in Dodge City. We've been able to do fourplexes in Hillsborough and Bel Air and Abilene. These are all nonprofit developers, Kansas nonprofit developers. For that, happy to stand for any questions, and I just appreciate this good conversation this week, as well as this entire session.
Okay, thank you very much. And it was my understanding that if we ceased this state portion of this, that the federal portion would still be there. Are you saying that is not the case?
I know that's correct, Mr. Chair. So if the state discontinued the Kansas Affordable Housing Tax Credit, we would continue to administer the state resource, which would take us from approximately 4,000 homes a year back to maybe 1,000 max.
Okay, so the federal program would still exist and you would still run that, but just not have a match from the state. And a match is not required from the state in order to draw down the federal funds. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
So we've been running this program for 30 years, us and our predecessor. However, we wouldn't be leveraging that private activity resource that we historically have been underutilizing.
Right. So the way this bill is written, does it also end your ability to utilize the federal portion of the program?
It doesn't. The effect of this statute would be that we wouldn't be able to pencil out most of those 4% bond deals. So we'd go back to an era where we're maybe awarding one $5 million private activity 4% bond deal versus the 15 that we were able to do last year. But you're correct, the original 9% and 4% resource at the federal level is still available.
Okay, and during your presentation, you said that there is a complex that's being built in Topeka under this?
That's correct.
Where's that?
Leslie, do you mind remind me? It's just right downtown, right? By the water tower here.
Oh, okay, great. Great.
These are, in virtually every city, and I think we've got something like 40 cities, 50 counties around the state that have developments ongoing through this tax credit.
All right, thank you. Committee questions? Representative Clayton. Ranking Member Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for coming back. I wasn't sure if anyone would want to after earlier this week, so grateful to see you here again. So I've got two quick questions. Number one, does your organization do, or are you aware of any economic studies regarding the return on investment on these, whether it's the federal or state level? Because I think that that's what a lot of the members of this committee are craving here, just given the tenor of the questions. So, and if you haven't, I want to hear a little bit more about how much one of those economic studies would cost.
Excellent and timely questions, Representative, because we have one ongoing right now. The KHRC recognized that this was going to be something that policymakers, our communities, our stakeholder partners are all going to want information on. So we have commissioned a study with Wichita State University, Kansas University, at KHRC's expense to make sure that we have the information that we need. They are currently looking at it. Unfortunately, we don't have the results yet. So we hope to have that here in the coming weeks, if not possibly even by, hopefully within this legislative session. But it specifically is trying to ascertain the economic return on investment, not just of this Kansas Affordable Housing Tax Credit, but all of the recent state housing development resources, the moderate income housing and the Kansas Housing Investor Tax Credit. Now, we are aware of other states that have done these, that have commissioned these studies. As the gentleman previously from Georgia had previously said, that one, you were consistently hearing $5 to $7 in economic return on every $1 of tax credit. And a reminder that if we don't have this resource, we're not going to utilize some of those federal dollars that are flowing into our state that get returned for other states to possibly use if we don't have this.
My second question is regarding federal dollars. So let's say that this bill passes and we end up, getting rid of it in Kansas, or at least repealing anything from the future. Have you talked to anyone at the federal level? What are things looking like there? Because I am disinclined to trust federal funds or anything from the federal government, given the turmoil that they're going through. They don't seem terribly stable. Can you speak to that? Because if we see a freezing of federal funds or a discontinuation, then we really are without anything. So I like the idea of safety nets and, multiple areas where we can shore this up. So can you speak to how things are going at the federal level, please?
I will be very careful in how I coined, as a program administrator for the state, as well as, a federal partner. We contract with a lot of different federal agencies. Things are definitely changing. And because of that, our state has been historically very reliant on these federal resources. Until these tax credits and until these resources the last couple of years, the state has put about 1%, 69 cents per Kansan per year into housing. The remainder all came from the federal government, much of which was underutilized because we haven't used that private activity bond cap. I will tell you that Senators Marshall, Senator Roberts previously, Senator Moran, our entire state House delegation in Congress all support the federal low-income housing tax credits. They've been advocates for it. It's a bipartisan supported resource that has been historically the biggest driver and generator of affordable housing in our state. And that's something that could be at risk in the future. And if our reliance is on that credit, we risk stepping back very much in our progress.
Well, that is very good to hear, and I know that we like to echo the sentiments of our federal delegation. So thank you for that information.
Thank you, Representative.
Any further questions for the conferee? All right, Ryan, thanks so much for your wealth of knowledge, and you do a great job initiating these programs and getting it out there. It's just, this committee just has some decisions to make on how affordable it could be.
I certainly understand, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, please realize that none of this angst is aimed at you. You do a great job.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to testify? Come on up. Are you neutral, positive, negative? Neutral. The League.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nathan Eberlein with the League of Kansas Municipalities. I'd like to recap what we talked about last week, and that is, in all of my circling around the state, it is just a consistent theme of hearing from our community leaders how pressing the need is for more housing. We came in as a neutral conferee, in part, Representative Tarwater, because of the concerns that you've certainly expressed on the financial side of things. We understand that the state has a large responsibility on the fiscal end of it, but keeping as many tools that we have available at the state's disposal to promote more housing, that's our interest. Ryan made the point earlier, yes, we have projects that are successful in our largest cities, but every quadrant of the state has got projects going on, and that hits a lot of our small ones: Newton, El Dorado, Coffeyville, Pittsburgh, Liberal. It's a wide stretch of big and small, and so having another tool available to continue promoting housing, that's our interest, but noting that there is a need to find some framework to make sure it's financially responsible. Happy to answer any questions that might be helpful.
Any questions, committee? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else? Rabbi, you're coming up here, aren't you? Come on. All right, there you go.
You don't have to ask me twice. Rabbi Moti Reber, Kansas Interfaith Action. I just wanted to talk about the question about homelessness and how this fits into that. So KIFA, Kansas Interfaith Action, is a member of the Kansas Housing Advocacy Network, which Ms. Guidry mentioned before. And we're a coalition working on housing issues. I know that's an issue. Every time I travel the state, I talk to clergy. They talk about homelessness in their community because churches are often the first responders to homelessness in their community. And we've been working in this coalition for about a year now, and we've developed a pretty significant detailed platform that has 3 planks. The first one is affordable housing, providing affordable housing that's necessary, or helping to facilitate affordable housing that's necessary to house people who are moderate income. The second one is keeping people who are in danger of homelessness in their homes. And the third one is rehousing people who are homeless. So affordable housing is an integral part of addressing the homelessness issue. So we have this policy, as you heard. I'm not the economic development guy. I'm the moral suasion guy. So as you heard, this is a major policy that we have that addresses this issue and raises and puts out 4,000 units of housing a year. That to take away the one policy that seems to be working to address this pressing issue seems counterproductive to me. So that's why we're opposing the bill.
All right, thanks for that. Any questions? All right, seeing none. You bet. Well, I figured we're not running the plastic bag bill this year, and I wanted to hear from you anyway. So, all right, committee, is there anyone else here that wants to testify in any way to this bill? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the hearing on this bill. In committee, I want to talk for just 1 minute. We will be working this bill next week. Our revisers are crunched for time and effort, and they've done yeoman's work to try to get all of our bills out of committee, to get onto the floor, to be sent back here to work. If you have amendments on this, either talk to me on it so we can coordinate, because you might all have similar amendments that we could maybe get people in a room and discuss an amendment that would work for the 2 or 3 of you that have the same similar type of amendment. You don't have to do that. I can't make you do that, but I'm asking you to consider the revisor's time, and if you go directly to the revisor for an amendment, let them know that if there's a similar one out there, that person that's bringing the other amendment would have his permission to discuss your amendment with them. So they're not having to write 20 different amendments on this. So just have a little bit of respect for the revisor's office. They've been through a lot. With that, we're adjourned.